Without numbers. So it's like things that can be broken into categories, organized in some way, but it is non-numerical. So some different options for working with those. We might see it represented like in tables. We could organize it that way. We could draw graphs. So those are kind of the different pieces we'll look at. Most of the time, if we're going to do a graph in here, we're not really going to do it by hand, so we'll use our Chromebooks today to look at some of those graphs. So first, I'm going to talk about a frequency distribution. So a lot of times you might be asked to make a frequency distribution, and that's really just a table where you list each category and the number of times it occurs. So it might be, I asked, what did you have for lunch today? And your different options were pizza, salad, pizza box, whatever. And I just marked how many people answered each of those different things. So for an example, this is the colors of M&Ms in a bag. And I want to make a frequency distribution. So you could do this on your Chromebook, but we'll just go ahead and do this one by hand. It's not too hard. So we will list, make a table. You should put some labels here. So I'm just going to make, we're looking at the colors, so we'll make a column for that. And then we'll make a column for the count or the frequency. Okay, it does not matter what order you put them in. So if I'm looking up here, I see we have brown, yellow, red, orange, blue, and green. So each of those will be a row in our data. So then we just count how many of each. So how many browns do we have? You guys get 12? Okay. Yellow. Of them. Red. Nine. Orange. Blue, three, green, 5. Any questions on that? So if I just say frequency distribution, that's all it is. It's not a graph or anything, just a table. You list all the different outcomes and how many times it occurred. Sometimes I'll ask you to find the relative frequency, and that's kind of like the proportion or the percent. You have a question? So to find it, just like if you're finding your percent, you just take the frequency divided by let's just say the total number. Okay, so it's like finding what percent of the M&Ms were brown, or what percent are red. We'll typically leave those in decimal form though, so instead of saying 10%, we would leave it as 0.1. So just leave it in decimal form. So what should all those add up to? 1. because altogether that's 100% all of them, so they should always add up to 1. And that's a good way to kind of double check yourself and look for mistakes. So the next example asks us to make the relative frequency distribution, and I'm just going to go back and add it onto here, because a lot of times we'll just do it in the same table. So if you have room, if not, you could do it here or in a new table. So frequency distribution lists the color and the frequency. Relative frequency, you have the color and the relative frequency, or you can just do it in one big table. Before we can find those, what do we need to know? Total number of M&Ms. So add all those up, but what do we get? 45, you guys agree? Okay, so to get our relative frequencies, we just take 12 divided by 45. Okay, so 12 out of 45 gives me 0.2, let's go 4 decimal places, 667. Next one, 10 out of 45. And then if you wanted to check yourself at the end, what would you do? Add them all up and it should equal 1. Is there the chance that it wouldn't equal 1? Mm-hmm. Yeah, because we rounded on a lot of those, but it should be very, very close if it's not exactly. Any questions about frequency or relative frequency? So next, I just want to talk about how we can use the Chromebook to kind of organize some of these with a graph. So our example 3 says to organize this, making a frequency bar graph and relative frequency bar graph. So you need your Chromebook. We're going to go to Google Sheets. Our first step is to enter all of our data. We can do, I would do titles with this too. So we had color, frequency to start with. And let's see, we did. Let's just write equals 1. Don't count it wrong this time, but go ahead and just put that. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So do you guys have this part? You can format however you like. If you want to bold things, if you want to put borders, all that's fine. I just want to show you, have you guys used Google Sheets much? So some people have and some have very little experience with it. So just a couple things. If we were doing the relative frequencies on here, you wouldn't have to calculate them all by hand. So, you know, some of your shortcuts, if you wanted to add all of those, it can. Do you guys know how to make it add? If you hit the equals, it will, you can enter like equations and it automatically, it's guessing what I want it to do. We want it to do sum. So you do SUM for sum. And it's basically your first one, which is at B2, And if you do the colon, you tell it where to end, or E7. And so it tells us that there are 45 of them. And so your relative frequencies, if we go to that box, we can say equals, and we want to do 12 divided by 45, and it gave us the relative frequency. And if you have that highlighted, if you look at this little box, you can, oops, that is not what I meant to do. It should, let's see, I have to remember because I use Excel most of the time instead of this. You can, continue that pattern down for all of them. Is it giving you guys the option to carry that? Never mind. A lot of times it will suggest what you are going to do next, and you can just hit enter and it'll continue. And these, do you guys know why those are fractions instead of decimals? What did I not do? Just because that's a common mistake. People say it's not calculating things. I didn't put the equals. So if it's not actually doing the calculation, that's because you left off your equal sign. So just remember to include that. All right, so I'm just trying to show you a few basics as we go through here. Any questions on those? All right, so now if we want our graph, first thing it asked us to do was to make a bar graph for the frequency. So I am going to highlight my color and my frequency. And then we can go to Insert, Chart, and it's going to give us probably the one we want is our first option, but if you look, different chart types, whatever you might need are here, but this is what we wanted. Notice because I had labels on my columns, it has the labels for my X and Y axis here. So you do need those labels. We can change any of those. So if we look at that, maybe I didn't want to call it frequency versus color. Maybe I wanted to call it something else. If you look over here under chart and axis titles, you can change any of those. So maybe I want to say frequency bar graph. Or whatever you might want to call it. Did everybody get that table?
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
I don't know how to get back.
Graph. I'm just going to pull that one over to the side. If I wanted you to make a relative frequency bar graph, so that means I need my colors and my relative frequencies. So you have to highlight those. Remember, if you hold down the control, then you can highlight things that are not adjacent to one another. And then we could do the same thing. Insert chart, and there we have it. And we could change titles or whatever we wanted. Notice these look the same. What's the only difference? Yeah, what the y-axis is counting by, whether it's those decimals or the number of times it occurred. All right. Questions? So this one is just another type of chart. You could see a Pareto chart. Is like a bar graph, but it's in decreasing order. It's not one I'm really going to use, but all it does is switch things around on your x-axis, so it goes from high to low. So in case you ever see one, it's the same thing. All right, this one shows us the marital status in millions of U.S. residents 18 years or older in 1990 and in 2006. Draw a side-by-side relative frequency bar graph of the data. Okay, so side by side, we are doing a bar graph, but we want to put both of these things on there. What do you think we need to do first? Yeah, enter our data. Okay. So we have our marital status. 1990, 2006. It asked for the relative frequency bar graph. So what do we need to do? Yeah, we need our total. So I could just say equal sum, and I want to go from B, mine starts at B15. And you'll notice it'll highlight the boxes we're doing. And then we need all of our relative frequencies. So maybe I'm gonna make 2 more columns here. So we want to do 40.4 divided by 181.9. And you'll notice if you do it that way, so I didn't type in 40.4, I said equals, and I just clicked the box that I wanted, divided by 181.9. It gives me the option for autofill. Well, it didn't that time. But if it gives you that option for autofill, you can use that. Sometimes it pops up and sometimes it doesn't. But did everybody get your relative frequencies? And of course, if you did them on your calculator and just typed in the numbers, that is also okay. This is to make it easier, but you don't have to do it that way.
You make them yourself?
What's wrong?
How do you do this?
So it's just this number. And it actually gave you the option to autofill.
Miss Frankel, can I please use the bathroom in waiting for my lesson this time? Yeah, thank you.
if yours autofilled, it probably had ones for these bottom two, which is fine, but technically they're not part of our distribution. We're just looking at the others. So now if we want to do a graph, we have to highlight everything we want. So we want the marital status. If you hold down control, we want these. Include the title, so it'll put them on our graph for us, but we don't want to include the total, the one. And then if we just insert a chart, it gives us a graph. We do need to make some changes on this one though. So you'll notice it has the legend, but some problems. Did it put a label on my y-axis? No. So if we want to do that, we have to add it in. So if we go to customize, and we can go to the second one, chart and axes titles. So you can change all the different ones. The first one, mine is showing the chart title, so maybe I want to make that marital status in 1990 and 2006. And then if you click the drop down arrow, you can change the vertical axis title, which is currently blank, but we could say relative frequency. But we should include something else there, because if you look back at that original problem, it told us, well, I guess we don't have to on this one, but sometimes we will. It told us that it was measured in millions. Okay, so for the relative frequency, it doesn't matter because that's just a percent. But if you were looking at just the frequencies, you would want to make sure that you put in millions there. So it didn't look like 2 people, that we knew it was 2 million. So if you have any important labels, you could include those. All right, any questions about how to make those? You can also represent things with horizontal bars. So ours are vertical, they can go horizontal. It's the same thing, really. The only time you might do that is if these labels are really wordy and you had a lot more words to include for that. Then you might want to flip your graph around. Okay, so that's just an example there. Final graph I want to talk about today, the pie chart. So we had one of those options. It's just a circle divided into sectors, and the size of it represents the amount it's covering, or the proportion. So if I wanted to make one of these, right, we would need to include our data. So this has the marital status and the frequency, which was really just this right here. Those were, or was it? Those weren't the same numbers, were they? Okay. So let's put that data in and we'll try to make one. So then if you highlight all that and insert your chart, it may come up with the pie chart automatically. If not, under this chart type, you can click it and it gives you the different options. So this is what we wanted. It does, you know, the biggest one representing the biggest proportion. It's got the percents and everything labeled for us. Any questions on these graphs? Couple things. So the homework has you making some graphs and reading a few. The ones that you make, please number your questions. These spreadsheets get really hard to look at when you just have everything piled on and no numbers or organization whatsoever. So please try to do that. I have a handout for you, but your Google Sheet that you'll make to go with it, there's a link on Classroom or an assignment open on Classroom that you can turn in the Google Sheet.